Welcome to another episode of Dr. Pundit, where we talk about music, not medicine. And it's another one of my episodes where I take a look at a small list of, I call them an anniversary list of sorts. These are albums that I take a look at that were released many years ago, usually decades ago. And if there's an anniversary, usually in the multiples of 5 or 10, I try to compile a list of at least 3 or so that were very special albums that were released in that particular month and still sound great today and are just as influential today as they were when they first released X many years ago. And looking back on these releases so many years into the future, we can get a glimpse of their greatness, but also their timelessness, how much they've pretty much served as a barometer and an emblem of essentially the period of time in which they were released, and do a great job of representing that period of time. And I've got 4 albums that I think fit that bill, released 40 years ago this month, June of 1985. It's June 1st, 2025, so it's a great way to kick off the month. Let's get into the first one, R.E.M. with their Fables of the Reconstruction album. Now, by the time the Georgia Trio released their 3rd album, they've had a lot of churning guitars, a lot of good riffs. They propel the bulk of the songs on this album. And Michael Stipe's lyrics, the lead singer, are at their most compelling, I think, on this album. He was really coming into his own. And songs like Driver 8 and Can't Get There From Here, very good tracks. And just when you think you have this album pegged as a somewhat unrelenting rush, the band drops off 2 off-kilter but quite touching ballads at the end of the line in Good Advices and Wendell G. One could say that they really inspired a lot of lo-fi bands with this approach on this particular album, and they were setting a really huge high bar with albums like this. Next up, Little Creatures by Talking Heads. Now, on the one hand, this album departs from the Talking Heads playbook of previous critical releases such as Remain in Light. And unlike that earlier record, the band didn't work this material up from scratch. Together, David Byrne came in with demos for most of the tracks here, and the band had to kind of work their way into them. So not starting from scratch, trying to adapt to demos that were used for this album. And I think this album essentially was probably the most accessible for the band. And as far as I'm concerned, it's the one that really got me into the band. That's why I'm including it here. It starts off a little bit off kilter, but In She Was, though that's the one everybody knows, even if they don't know the title of the song. Creatures to Love and, Road to Nowhere, a classic closing track, best described as a galloping apocalyptic gospel, I suppose. I kind of cribbed that from a critical review there. Little Creatures by Talking Head. A couple more albums now. Sting with probably, I think, the best known album of this bunch by even the casual music listener, The Dream of the Blue Turtles, an album released in the summer of 1985, June. Of course, it's 40 this year. Having conquered the rock world with the Police, he decided to take on somewhat a drastic turn with his first solo album. And I remember when this album came out, I really, really wanted to hear it. Finally, for lack of a better term, isolating that voice of the Police to stuff that it was only he was responsible for. And much of the Dream of the Blue Turtles traffics in jazz-oriented pop song structures. Some of it bled into R&B at the time, like the lead single, If You Love Somebody, Set Them Free, was a top 40 hit on the R&B charts, as well as hitting, of course, top 5 on the pop charts that year. The fact that he employed Branford Marsalis as a crucial instrumentalist only added to that ethic. And it just kind of tells you all you need to know with where Sting's head was at with this particular album. Of course, he gets into his brooding state with tracks like Russians and Fortress Around Your Heart. Very good tracks. The former was a top 20 hit. The latter was a top 10 hit. And, you just can't take that out of the guy. But all around, I think a very good album, influential in the fact that it basically served as a good springboard and foundation for Sting's career. Finally, Boys and Girls by Bryan Ferry. This album came out in June of 1985. And Ferry decided that Roxy Music pretty much ran its course by 1983. And this fact really made this album his official, for lack of a better term, debut. Even though he had recorded previous albums under Bryan Ferry and Roxy Music, this one just felt it's just him. He's officially kind of, left that complete era, and a very good era it was, and basically said, hey, it's just me this time. And I think he released a pretty top shelf album with Boys and Girls. And around the time he released this record, bands were popping up all around with his brand, I think, that he pioneered, of British sophisticated pop, or sophistopop, if you rather to shorten it there. And so I think he realized this, and I think he wanted to say, hey, Boys and Girls, yes, it's along that line, but I still can prove that no one can really touch me and my arrangement of music. And I think it really worked. I think he did stake his claim, and this album does sound really unique. You should take a listen to it. Definitely a style innovator. The classic track, Slave to Love, stands out, of course, as a romantic hit. Don't call this guy a new romanticist. I think he'll slap you in the face. That's kind of the name critics give to these other bands with stylistic pop at the time, like Spandau Ballet, for example, okay, and some of the more ethereal, deeper Duran Duran tracks. Slave to Love, not the only captivating track on the album. The title cut, Boys and Girls, very good in this vein as well. So I think I'll stop there. 4 really cool albums released in June of 1985 that showcase very stable pop rhythms and arrangements that definitely hold their own today. I would stream them all. I don't think you'll be disappointed. And just to recap, Boys and Girls by Bryan Ferry, The Dream of the Blue Turtles by Sting, Fables of the Reconstruction by R.E.M, and Little Creatures by Talking Heads. I'm Michael Douglas, and if you like what you see here on Dr. Pundit, don't hesitate to like and subscribe. And as the late great Barry White always used to say, let the music play, and I'll see you on the next episode.